were informed the weather was zero visibility with severe turbulence and severe icing. So fairly high-risk flying conditions, and with the visibility the way it is, very low probability of seeing anything out there at all.
Adam Shantz from the American Air Force in Perth, Australia. You've got the Americans, the Australians, the Koreans, so many people working together to find the Malaysian Airlines flight that disappeared, 2 weeks ago now. But Simon Kent, who's worked in much of that part of the world, says, well, there's a reason that there have been troubles in the search. And Simon, you put this down to the fact that these are governments that don't trust each other, and there's new information out showing that, again, they weren't sharing information in the early stages. They might still not be sharing it.
A lot of these governments barely talk to each other and barely acknowledge the existence of their neighbours. You look at the historical enmities between Malaysia and China for a start. I mean, you would have thought these two countries would be critical. It would be critical for them to work together. Most of the passengers on that flight were Chinese. The Malaysians, in the first 48 hours of the search, wouldn't let anyone know what they knew and what they didn't know about the search area or the plane's flight path. The Chinese got steadily more angry, and then we found out that the Malaysians didn't want to release their military radar information because they didn't want their neighbours in Indonesia or Singapore to know how effective their radar was. At the whole time, China is sitting on the sidelines. China is fuming that they've lost all their nationals in this catastrophic accident. The search was in the South China Sea, and then we find out that for days the Malaysians knew that actually the plane turned to port, tracked west, and then went south down into the Indian Ocean. And that's when the Chinese really hit the roof. Believe me, it's going to be on very soon. I've worked in Malaysia and Indonesia for that matter. I think I've got a bit of an understanding of how these countries operate, and China is just furious. And there could be some interesting steps coming up very soon, Brian.
So this could turn from just being a tragedy, human tragedy, these families distraught. We've seen those pictures. We've seen the video. This could turn into very much a geopolitical issue as well, if I'm picking up what you're saying, in that the Chinese might seek some sort of retribution against their neighbours.
Oh yeah, that's going to happen big time. Let me put a scenario to you, Brian. When this plane went down, when it's found, there are 7 Chinese ships right now at the bottom of the Indian Ocean, just near where the Southern Ocean starts, at about 40 degrees south in the roaring 40s. What happens if these Chinese ships start picking up wreckage and they say to the Malaysians, you're running the investigation, but we're going to take this material back to China because we want to run our own investigation because we don't trust you and we don't trust the outcomes you deliver because you keep whitewashing everything. I mean, this is a very real prospect because the Chinese are down there right now in the Indian Ocean. There's no one to stop them picking up this equipment and going back. And believe me, the Malaysians would go, as you'd expect, ballistic. And I don't mean that in the literal sense, but in the metaphorical sense. They're going to get so angry, and the Chinese have just about had it as it is.
And we can see the map there right now where they think the plane may have ended up. Yeah. What I don't understand still, unless we look at a terrorism or suicide mission sort of scenario, is if they were flying that close to Perth and they were in trouble, why didn't they go to Perth?
That's the human factor, and they're one of the factors we don't know. There's another question too. When this plane entered the Indian Ocean, it would have flown very close to Diego Garcia. That's this tiny island at the top of the Indian Ocean. It's probably one of the most secretive outposts of the US government in the world, a spy facility that has massive capability when it comes to military radar. I wonder if that plane was tracked by Diego Garcia by the US, but they didn't want to say anything because they didn't want to reveal their capabilities in that part of the world. And don't forget, when we first saw those grainy images from space that the Chinese released, the images looked like they'd been pixelated, like they're a little bit obscured. Again, the Chinese not wanting to reveal to the world how good their technology is and how capable they are.
That's fascinated me, is that these images coming out, am I really to believe that these powerful governments, national governments, have satellite imagery worse than Google Earth?
Isn't it amazing that we have this feeling that we can walk down the street and we're told that there are satellites that can read the print off the newspaper if we're sitting in a park. It can read the phone, the cell number we're dialing in, yet at the same time we can't identify whether or not a piece of plastic in the Southern Ocean is a bulkhead or not. And I'm not a scientist, but I'm just putting this out there and saying that something's not matching up.
We're being lied to at one end or the other.
At one end or the other. And all this stuff comes out very slowly because, again, the French have released satellite information, the Australians, the US, the Chinese. But it does take a while to filter through. There's all this geopolitics at play, and Southeast Asia is such a hotbed of enmities and distrust. And don't forget, during the first 48 hours of that flight, Indonesia didn't want search planes flying through its airspace because it didn't want to take responsibility, and it just didn't want the prospect of someone spying, because everyone is paranoid that the Chinese are spying on the Malaysians, who are spying on the Indonesians, and Singapore is right in the mix there as well. Then you've got countries like Burma, which is a paranoid kingdom that looks out at the world as a potential enemy. At the same time, Brian, people died. Over 230 souls are lost, yet all this bickering and quibbling, and it goes on and on. It's just it's an underplayed story, but it should be much more significant. It should be brought more out into the open.
This is what I was thinking the whole time you're talking about all these countries, and I'm just thinking of the families. We've got the families of the 2 Canadians. You've got the families of hundreds of Chinese. You've got families at different parts around the world just saying, I want answers. And part of it, you're right, a lot of satellite images. My understanding is some of the ones that came out originally showing that the plane may have been downed off Australia. It took a long time to get to them because there was so much information, but at the same time, so much information being held back.
Exactly. And this story is going to go on and on. But as I said, it is a positive in the story. You look on the flight line at RAAF Base Pearce in Western Australia, you've got planes from South Korea and Japan who don't really get on, next to China, who gets on with nobody, next to the US, next to Australia, next to New Zealand. They're flying sorties out there every day. They're doing a really good job, and they're working really hard. And I think that's a sign of hope. I think it's a sign of hope for goodwill for humanity, that people can put aside their differences in this case and just get on with doing the job of bringing some closure to those families who have lost a loved one. Just what happens in the next couple of days when they do start finding debris, which they're confident they will, the story's context and texture might change, and that's when we might see China and Malaysia really roaring at each other.
All right, and of course, always waiting for that black box to find out exactly what happened. Simon, thanks for dropping by. We'll chat soon.
Pleasure.